Story 1. Ghost of Tower Green, London, England. The Tower of London doesn't sleep. Not really. It waits. I've walked its grounds countless nights, boots echoing over cobbles older than memory, but this night felt different. The sky was thick with darkness. No stars, no moon, just a velvet void pressing down on the stone walls like a weight of centuries. My lantern hissed in the stillness, the flame too small, too fragile to touch the blackness ahead. I started my patrol just past midnight, crossing beneath the cold shadow of the Byward Tower. The air was sharp, quiet, not the peace of stillness, but the kind of silence that listens. Every step I took came back louder, like something was walking just behind me, matching stride for stride but never overtaking. I passed the Trader's Gate, glancing down at the black water below. Even the river seemed to be holding its breath. The tower's bones are old, and they creak when the wind moves through them. But there was no wind tonight, not a whisper, just the sound of my boots and my own heartbeat. I kept walking, tracing the old paths across the inner ward, past the White Tower, rising pale and watchful, and then I caught it. A scent. Rosewater. Faint. Fleeting. Utterly out of place. The kind of smell you don't notice until it's already fading. There was no one else on the grounds. No one who should have worn perfume from another century. I stopped outside the Wakefield Tower. It loomed like a crooked finger jutting into the night. The lantern light flickered against its windows, casting strange shadows that didn't move quite right. I stood there staring at the closed wooden door. That's when I heard them. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, slow. From just the other side of the door, I froze. My breath hitched. My hand went to the handle of my torch, but I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. I knew no one should be inside at that hour. No tours, no staff, nothing but stone and stories. And yet, the footsteps stopped right there, as if whatever was behind the door was listening back. I shifted to the narrow window beside the entry and peered through. The courtyard beyond was still, no movement, no light, nothing. But the feeling pressed in stronger now, that something was aware of me, watching, waiting. I stepped back, heart pounding hard enough I could hear it in my ears. The ground beneath me felt warmer, not from the air, from the stone itself, like heat rising from memory, not fire. The phrase came to me unbidden, carved from nowhere. The stones underfoot felt warmer than the air, like they remembered something I didn't. I took one more look at the door. Then I moved on, not out of bravery, but because standing still felt worse. The tower had breathed tonight, and I wasn't sure it had exhaled yet. I should have turned back. After hearing the footsteps outside the Wakefield Tower, logic told me to file it away as nothing. Old stone settling, maybe a trick of the wind. But logic doesn't explain rose water in the dead of winter, or why the air near the tower had turned so still I could hear my pulse in my ears. I stepped toward the narrow window beside the heavy oak door, just enough space to look out onto the courtyard. I leaned in, breath fogging the glass. Nothing, no movement, no figure, just the weight of the tower pressing in around me, and yet the footsteps began again. Software, unhurried, on stone, but not from outside, from within. They paced across the chamber on the other side of the door, pausing, then starting again, not aimless, not panicked, measured and close. I gripped the handle just to test the door, locked, as it should have been. A cold knot twisted in my gut. That room hadn't been opened in days. I drew back slowly, trying not to breathe too loud, and that's when I heard it. A sound no man should hear in a place like that at an hour like this. Sobbing, low, guttural, not loud, but raw. It came in waves, swelling and fading, as if carried on a wind that wasn't blowing. I pressed my back to the wall beside the door, my skin cold against the stone. The sobbing stopped. Silence. For a moment, I almost believed it had been in my head. But something shifted. In my memory, voices I hadn't recalled in years. Old guards whispering over the night shifts, speaking of figures glimpsed on the stairs, candles snuffing without touch, a mirror that wouldn't reflect one man's face. Tales you dismiss until the night feels wrong enough to make them real again. And this night was wrong. Against better judgment, I entered the Wakefield Tower. My lantern flickered the moment I crossed the threshold. Not from draft, there was none. The flame sputtered and bent, as if ducking something unseen. Inside, everything was still, but not untouched. A chair sat just slightly off from where it usually rested beneath the window. A curtain hung crooked, swaying once, then stopping despite the closed room. I scanned the walls, corners, even the ceiling. Nothing, and yet I felt it. Not a presence, a pressure, like standing too close to thunder that hasn't cracked yet. My skin tingled, and the hairs on my arms lifted as if drawn by static. And then, breathing, close, too close, not mine, behind me. I spun so fast my lantern nearly slipped from my hand. The room was empty, but something had turned with me. I know it, like two dancers mirroring each other, one made of blood and bone, the other made of memory and air. The flame in my lantern steadied, but I didn't. I backed toward the door, eyes locked on the center of the room, as though something might unfold from the stone itself. And as I stepped across the threshold, the air thickened, dense, humid, like passing through breath. I closed the door behind me, slowly, respectfully. I didn't run, but I didn't look back. I had heard something in that room, and it had heard me too. I don't remember deciding to leave the Wakefield Tower. It was like my feet moved without asking permission, guided by something older than reason. I stepped back into the courtyard, and the night had changed. The air had thickened, dense with moisture and quiet as a held breath. The flame in my lantern flickered violently and then steadied, casting a glow that seemed to crawl reluctantly across the stones. I turned toward Tower Green, a path I'd walked 100 times in daylight, but now every step felt like a descent. Not downward exactly, just inward, deeper, into something waiting. The iron railings that ringed the green were rimmed with frost, though it hadn't been cold enough for it earlier. My breath came out in slow clouds. The wind still refused to blow, but the trees nearby rustled faintly, as if responding to something that wasn't me. I stopped just before the low rise of the execution site. The stone here is smoother than elsewhere, worn not by footsteps, but by memory. Everything around me was still, unnaturally so. Even the tower itself, ever looming, seemed to hold its voice. No groan of old beams, no creak of iron hinges, just quiet. Then, out of that silence, came the mist. It didn't roll or creep. It simply was, like it had always been there and was only just choosing to reveal itself. It clung to the ground in patches at first, then gathered itself into a low, swirling veil that thickened around the center of the green. I stared, and she stepped from it. A woman, Tudor gown, dark, full, gliding without touching the earth. Her hands hung at her side, still and pale. White flowers circled her neck where her head should have been, but she wasn't headless, not entirely. As she moved closer, the mist shifted, lifting just enough to reveal her face, only for a moment, regal, sad, framed in the soft shimmer of a pearl-encrusted cap. Her expression held no rage, just an unbearable stillness, like sorrow carved in marble. Anne Boleyn. There was no mistaking her. She passed by without noticing me or pretending not to. Her steps made no sound on the cobbles, but I could feel their rhythm, a pulse through the soles of my boots. She reached the center of the green and stopped, bowed her head, though there was no neck for it to fall from. Not toward anyone, not toward anything, just bowed, as if in some private mourning too sacred to disturb. I wanted to call out, I wanted to move, but I couldn't. My breath shortened, chest tight, limbs numb. Every inch of my body resisted me, like it knew something my mind refused to accept. Her silence was deafening. My bones ached just looking at her. Then slowly she lifted her head and turned slightly, as though listening for something in the fog. But she never looked at me. She never needed to, because the tower did, and it remembered everything. I couldn't move, even as she turned away, gliding in silence back through the mist that had welcomed her. The weight of something ancient held me where I stood, not fear, not even awe. It was memory, not mine. Heron, the towers. She passed through the gate to the inner ward like smoke. Her footsteps made no sound, yet the echo of them, sharp, precise, rang through the stones long after she vanished. And still I stood, muscles tense, heart pounding, eyes wide as if they could pierce time. Seconds passed, like hours, or maybe time had folded in on itself, because in that moment the tower breathed again. The air around me thickened, humming with pressure, as if the walls themselves remembered the screams, the silence. The sentence passed down on a summer morning and carried out with a sword cold as the crown that cost her everything. I blinked, and there she was again, just her face hovering in the mist that hadn't fully lifted. Anne, no longer headless, no longer a shadow. Her face was pale and perfect, eyes wide, not accusing, but hollow, sorrowful, resigned, and then, as if someone had closed an invisible curtain, it vanished. No sound, no flash, just gone. The mist pulled back toward the tower like water drawn into a tide. I could finally breathe again, but my chest was tight, my limbs like stone. The ground beneath me gave the faintest throb beneath my boots, like the tower had a second heartbeat, and it was under my feet. She didn't haunt the place haunted her. That thought entered my mind, fully formed, and it would never leave. I staggered back, boots scraping against the cobbles. I made it past the execution site, past the frost-bitten railings, past the place where she had bowed to something no one else could see. And then I ran. I don't remember the rest of the route, only that the echo of her shoes, click, 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 stayed with me, even though the courtyard was silent. It followed me like breath on my neck. I didn't speak of it, not to the watch commander, not in the incident log. When pressed, I only said, "The past is not at rest," and I meant it. The Tower of London isn't just history. It remembers, it grieves, and some nights, when the mist rolls and the wind dies, it calls her back. Not as a ghost of vengeance, but as a queen who never truly left her throne of stone. Story 2. Sawney Bean's Lair, Ayrshire, Scotland. They began as murmurs, half-formed thoughts behind the hands of frightened villagers. I'd hear them in Ayrshire's taverns, in the market squares, even in the hush of passing riders. "Travelers gone missing," they whispered, "vanishings near the cliffs." Some spoke of a cursed place, of a gaping mouth in the hills that swallowed the lost. I should have ignored them. God knows I wish I had. It was early spring of 1604 when the last merchant caravan disappeared. No wheeled tracks past the coastline, no bodies, no sign of a struggle, just the horses, found days later, still hitched and wide-eyed with terror, their hooves slick with blood, not their own. I remember standing on the bluff above the sea, wind gnawing at my coat, staring down into that jagged crease in the rock. Benane Cave. Locals wouldn't go near it. They crossed themselves and changed the subject. Some claimed the place had never known light, that even at midday its depths stayed darker than a grave. I couldn't leave it be. I'm not a man ruled by superstition, but there was a gnawing in my chest that wouldn't ease. Not until I stepped into that hole and saw what lay beneath. I assembled a small party, 6 men I trusted, veterans of border skirmishes, all sharp-eyed and sharper-bladed. We set out at dawn. The path wound through the moors, hills rising like broken teeth around us. Not a bird called, not a hair stirred. Even the wind held its breath. By midday, we reached the cliffside. There it waited. Benane Cave, a yawning black wound in the stone, wide enough to swallow a carriage, yet giving off no sound, just cold. A deep, wet cold that clung to our bones. We lit our torches. The flame barely pushed back the dark, as if the cave itself were drinking in the light. The entrance sloped down sharply, and the stone underfoot grew slick with something I refused to name. We pressed on, single file. The walls narrowed, the ceiling dripped, then came the stench. It wasn't the scent of rot you'd find on a battlefield. No, this was older, deeper. It was as if the earth itself had been rotting for centuries, and now breathed its foulness back through this throat in the hills. One of the men gagged. Another muttered a prayer he thought I couldn't hear. I said nothing. I just kept walking. Somewhere behind us the light of day vanished. We were swallowed whole. That's when I felt it. That sense you get in a forest before the arrow looses. Eyes in the dark. Watching. Not curious. Hungry. The air grew tighter. Every step sounded too loud. I could feel the others tense behind me, hands slipping to hilts. Then I saw it. A wall, smooth at first glance, but no, not stone. It shimmered wetly in the torchlight. I moved closer. It was clothing. Dozens of garments, moldy and stiff, plastered to the rock. Underneath them, glints of metal, rings, buckles, shattered spectacles. I reached out and touched something soft and recoiled. It was a child's shoe, still tied. I turned to speak and froze. A single bone lay in the path, clean, picked bare. And ahead of us, the tunnel opened wider, yawning like the mouth of something ancient and starving. We had found the lair, and something deep inside it was still awake. The cave swallowed us in stages, first the light, then the warmth, and finally the sense that the world above had ever existed at all. With each step, the walls drew closer, and the shadows deepened until even the sound of our boots was absorbed into the pressing dark. We moved in silence, save for the occasional scrape of a torch haft against stone. My men were seasoned and disciplined, but I saw it in their eyes, how they avoided looking too long into the dark corners, how their hands tightened on their blades without meaning to. This place was wrong, not just dangerous, but unnatural. It wasn't merely dark and banana cave. It felt as though the dark lived here. The tunnels coiled like intestines, slick with moisture. Our torches flickered on surfaces wet and glistening, reflecting twisted shapes that vanished the moment they were noticed. The air grew colder, heavier, as though we were pushing into the lungs of something ancient and buried. Then the smell hit us. It wasn't gradual. It came all at once, like stepping into a butcher's stall in the height of summer. The stink of old wet rot, of meat long past death. One of the men, Reeve, I believe, gagged behind me and muttered something under his breath. I didn't need to hear it. I felt it in my own stomach. Every breath was like inhaling decay. Then we heard it, a sound I will never forget. Not a voice, not a cry, but a shuffling, uneven, damp, bare feet on wet stone, very close, and not just one pair. I raised my hand. We froze, backs to the stone, listening. The sound stopped. My heart hammered. Then one of the younger men, Barrett, stepped forward to check the next bend. He raised his torch around the curve of the wall and staggered back with a gasp, his mouth working without words. I moved forward and saw what he had seen. A cavern opened before us, and on its walls, God help me, its walls, they were covered. What at first looked like hanging animal carcasses resolved into far worse truths. Arms, legs, torsos, some half-eaten, some freshly severed, all strung up like game in a butcher's store. Clothing still clung to some, tattered and blood-stained, watches, rings, trinkets, human remnants in piles below the grisly trophies. The torchlight danced over skulls, dozens, some whole, others cracked or gnawed. A child's doll sat near one pile, its face smudged with what I prayed was only dirt. I couldn't move, not for a moment. I could only stare and try to understand the scale of it. This wasn't random. This was habit, a system, a way of life. And then I knew the whispers had been wrong. This wasn't just a lair for beasts. This was home to something human once, and far worse now. Behind me, one of the men whispered, "It's true. The stories, all of them." Another voice, trembling, said, "We shouldn't be here." He was right. Something shifted in the far dark, a faint, low scrape of stone on stone. Then another, then a soft, wet sound. The feeling of being watched returned, heavier now. Closer, I turned, torch raised high, and saw what I thought was a figure ducking behind a jagged pillar. "Steal out," I said, voice tight. "We are not alone." The torches flickered again, just slightly as if exhaling in fear. Somewhere deeper in the dark, something moved again. The maw had opened, and now it was breathing. I should have turned back. I should have sealed the cave with stone and silence, let the earth keep its horrors buried. But duty, foolish, cold duty, pushed me forward. The moment we entered that cursed chamber, I knew we were not alone. From the far edge of the torchlight came a sound, low, wet, and animal. A growl, not from a beast, but something that wanted to be one. I raised my blade. Every man around me tensed. The cave seemed to breathe with us. Shadows stretched and recoiled. Then, from behind a crooked column of jagged stone, he stepped out. Sawney Bean. I had read his name only in whispers, in accounts that were half legend, half warning, but now I saw him. Flesh and fury, his form twisted by years in the dark. He was short but solid, a crouched silhouette of sinew and grime. His skin was gray with filth, his eyes yellowed, glowing faintly in the firelight. In his hand, He gripped a butcher's blade rusted and blackened by time and use. Behind him, they emerged like phantoms. 14 children, if they could be called children. They were hunched and skeletal, skin stretched thin over brittle bones. Some had matted hair, others none at all. Their faces were pale and feral, their eyes wide, teeth yellow and too many. They blinked at the light as if it burned. Some hissed. One giggled, a high choking sound that didn't belong in the throat of any living thing. They did not wait. With a shriek that shattered the last silence of the cave, they charged. Chaos. I remember screaming, not from fear, but to rally what little strength we had left. Blades clashed, torches fell. My men swung and stabbed, but the Sawneys were not men. They moved with a frenzied purpose, clawing and biting, crawling across the floor and even walls like insects in a feeding frenzy. Reeve was the first to go, dragged backward into the dark. I heard his scream cut short. Barrett tried to follow, only to be met with a blade in his side from Sawney himself. The feral patriarch snarled something, language twisted by time and madness, and lunged at me. I met him with steel. Our blades clanged. His strength was startling, almost inhuman. He struck like a butcher, hacking without rhythm or restraint. I parried and slashed, torch gripped in my offhand, keeping his wild eyes locked in the firelight. But around me, I could hear my men dying. One by one, their screams swallowed by the cave. I caught Sawney across the jaw. He stumbled. I didn't give him time to rise. I drove my blade deep into his side, twisting. He shrieked, not in pain, but rage. He fell finally to the stone, yet the children fought on. They didn't stop. They didn't retreat. Even as some burned from torch strikes, even as they bled, they crawled forward. One sank its teeth into my arm. I felt flesh tear. Another leapt at my back. I rolled, crushing it under me. By the time the last of them fell, gnashing its teeth, even as blood pooled beneath it, I was alone. Blood dripped from my hands, mine and theirs, my men gone. I stood in that fetid cavern, surrounded by corpses that should never have been born. I remember the sound of dripping water, blood, I could not tell. My own breathing came ragged and loud, the only living sound left in the chamber, and in the flickering light I saw them all, 48 of them broken and still, the last of the Sawney clan. But even then I did not feel victory, only silence, only the weight of what I had seen and what I had done. The air had changed. I could feel it, the weight of it, the coldness beginning to retreat ever so slightly. Somewhere above, far beyond the choking stone, the sky had begun to pale. But deep within that cavern, the dawn was still only a memory I clung to. I stood among them, 48 bodies in all, some twisted beyond recognition, others frozen in expressions of hate or hunger, my men and the Sawneys. My sword hung limp in my grip, too slick with blood to hold steady. My torch sputtered low, its flame coughing as if it too wanted out. I forced myself to move, not by strength, but by the numb instincts of the living, desperate to remain so. Step by step, I began dragging the corpses toward the cave mouth. It was not out of kindness. It was necessity. Proof. The first body I dragged, Lyle, had no face left. I told myself not to look. The second was one of the children, small and misshapen. I swore it twitched when I grabbed its wrist. I nearly dropped it, but there was no breath left in it, only the memory of something cruel and ravenous. The climb was endless. The tunnel had grown longer since we'd come down. My legs trembled. My breath came shallow. The cave pulsed with a strange silence. No skittering, no growls, just the creak of my boots over stone and the wet pull of limbs over grit. And then, light. Not firelight, not flicker or flame, real light. The pale gray of morning, soft and solemn, leaked through the cracks near the mouth of the cave. I staggered forward, dragging one final body behind me, and collapsed just outside. I remember the cold dew of the grass, the scent of sea air, no longer masked by rot. I lay there a long while, chest heaving, eyes wide and unseeing. That's when I heard them, voices, locals, dozens. They had come in silence, drawn by the same rumors that had led me into the abyss. Some clutched tools, shovels, blades, torches. Most stopped short when they saw me. Others rushed forward, eyes widening at the carnage spilled before the cave. Not a soul spoke. They didn't need to. One man, a shepherd I recognized only faintly, stared past me into the black mouth of the cave and whispered, "So it was true then?" I nodded. I couldn't find words. Together, we dragged the rest of the bodies out. By noon, the hillside was littered with remains, limbs, and the blood-stained weapons of my fallen men. The Sawney's lair had been emptied, but their legend had only begun. That afternoon, I sat on the cliff's edge, watching the gray sea stretch endlessly east. I could not eat. I could barely think. I closed my eyes for only a moment and saw them again. The limbs, the teeth, the eyes, in the dark. Every time I blinked, they were there. Every breath I took felt borrowed. I never went back. Even now, decades later, I still wake in the night, gasping for air, clawing for the torch I no longer carry. My body is old, my hands shake, but the cave remains, and the memory of it clings to me like damp stone. Some say that on stormy nights you can hear sobbing in the cliffs above Benaye. Some say they've seen a shadowed figure at the cave's edge, hunched and waiting. I believe them, because evil once born does not die easy. It waits, it remembers, and sometimes it hungers still. Story 3. The Villisca Axe House, Villisca, Iowa, USA. I should have left the second I saw the moon. Blood red and bloated, it hung over Villisca like an omen no one wanted to speak about. It turned the trees black and bent their shadows like claws across the sidewalk. The old Moore house waited at the end of the lane, crouched in on itself like a patient predator. Built in 1868, its Queen Anne frame had once been proud and charming. Now it looked like a corpse dressed in lace, its wood rot like festering wounds, its windows dark eyes that never blinked. I stood outside the crooked fence where the words were still faintly visible, painted years ago in shaky white strokes. Villisca Axe Murder House. The letters were peeling, almost as if the house itself was trying to forget what happened inside. But I remembered. Everyone did. 8 murdered in their sleep. Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 overnight guests, slaughtered by an unknown hand sometime in the early hours of June 10th, 1912. The killer had never been found. The case had never been closed. The front gate let out a rusty shriek when I opened it. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, but I flinched. My boots crunched on gravel as I made my way to the porch, each step slower than the last. I was alone, but something about the house made me feel observed, watched. The front door creaked open before I even touched it. I should have left then. The first thing I noticed was the cold. Not the kind that came from bad insulation or Midwestern wind, but the kind that lives in bone. My breath fogged instantly. I tightened my jacket, clicked on my flashlight, and stepped inside. The beam flickered, As I moved it across the front parlor, dust swirled in the air, thick as ash. On the floor, just beside a warped rocking chair, lay a shattered porcelain doll. Its painted face cracked, its glass eyes missing. One arm was gone entirely. Next to it, an overturned wooden chair. No signs of recent visitors, no tracks on the dusty floor, just silence. Until the laugh. It was faint, like a breath caught between two floorboards. Childlike and quick. The kind of giggle that would have once meant hide and seek or a game of tag. But here, in this airless room, it sounded like something dying trying to sound alive. My flashlight blinked once, then again. My hand tightened around it. I scanned the hallway that led deeper into the house. Old wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing the splintered wood beneath. A family portrait still hung near the staircase. The faces were faded, but I could just make out the children, their small eyes gazing at the lens like they knew something was coming. A gust of wind howled from somewhere deeper inside, except none of the windows were open. Something moved in the corner of my vision. I spun. Nothing. Just the doll, the chair, and the open door behind me. I took one step toward the stairs and froze when I heard it, a soft creaking above as though weight shifted slowly on the floorboards. Someone, or something, was up there, and I had just entered its house. The stairs groaned under my feet. As I ascended, the temperature dropped with every step till it felt like I was climbing into a freezer lined with dust and dread. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched ahead, flanked by bedrooms on both sides. My flashlight quivered in my hand, the beam skimming across faded wallpaper and scuffed wooden floors. The stillness was unbearable, not silent, but expectant. I reached the first door, a child's room. The bed was small, covered in a faded patchwork quilt. A headless teddy bear slumped against the pillow, and above it, a wall drawing done in crayon still lingered, stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. My throat tightened. 6 children. 6 innocent children had slept in rooms just like this one, their final dreams shattered by an axe they never saw coming. As I stepped deeper into the hall, the floorboards behind me creaked. Once, then again. I stopped. Nothing. But then, a whisper. My name. Clara! I spun. The hall was empty. My heart thudded against my ribs. A dull scraping sound came from the second bedroom on the left. I raised the flashlight and pushed open the door. 2 shapes stood by the bed. Small. Still. Children. My breath caught. They weren't solid. Not quite. More like smudges of light clinging to form. A boy and a girl hand in hand gazing silently at the ceiling. I followed their eyes. A wooden ladder hung above the bed, folded into the ceiling panel. It began to tremble, slowly at first, then violently, no wind, no movement in the air, but it shuddered like something was climbing down it from the other side. And then it stopped. The figures turned their heads toward me, slowly, their faces blurred at the edges, their eyes dark pools of something lost. Without a sound, they pointed to the rug. I approached, every nerve in my body screaming. The rug was worn, discolored. I knelt, fingers trembling, and pulled it back. A garment, a child's nightdress, lay beneath it, stained deep red across the chest. Still, after all this time, the blood hadn't faded. The fabric clung to the wood like it had grown roots there. My flashlight flickered. In the flash of dark, I felt something behind me, breathing, close. I stood up fast, scanning the room. No one. But then the floor began to change. I stared, stunned, as faint footprints appeared in the dust, one after another, forming from nothing, small, bare, childlike. They walked slowly across the floors, circling me. Then they stopped, just inches away. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then came the laugh, again, louder this time, from the hallway. I bolted through the door, flashlight swinging wildly as I stumbled after the sound. The hall was longer than before, or I was moving slower. Ahead, something crashed, a door slammed, and upstairs, footsteps, real, heavy, deliberate. Something was still here. I gripped the flashlight tighter and made for the next staircase. The guest room waited, and so did the dead. The house groaned above me. It wasn't just the creaking of age or wind threading through the boards. It was aware, watching, waiting. The crash I'd heard moments ago had come from the guest room, the one where the two overnight visitors met the same brutal end as the Moore family. I forced myself forward, down the warped hallway, past the faded family portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every step. The guest room door was half open. My flashlight's beam trembled as it swept across the wood. I stepped inside. It smelled faintly of iron. The air was so still, it felt like the room hadn't moved since 1912, as though the clock had died right along with them. There, in the corner by the small closet door, stood a boy, no older than 10, pale. His hair was a soft blonde, matted as if he'd just risen from a long, restless sleep. He wore a white nightshirt smeared with something dark down the front. He didn't move. He just stared, and his mouth was moving. I stepped closer, heart thudding, trying to make out the words. There were none, no sound, just the slow, deliberate movement of lips repeating something again and again like a prayer trapped between words. I called out, softly, uselessly, but he didn't react. Then, as if noticing me for the first time, the boy turned his head. His eyes were full, not empty, but void. Something behind them had been taken or swept clean, and then he glided straight toward the closet. My skin prickled as he passed right in front of me, the flashlight beam warping as it passed through his figure. He reached the closet door, paused, and turned back one final time. His lips stopped moving. His hand lifted slowly, pointed to the wall. Then he vanished, not in a flicker or a scream, but like a breath exhaled too quietly to hear. The closet door creaked open by itself, empty, just old coats and shadow. Behind me, my journal fell from my satchel to the floor with a loud slap. I hadn't touched it. I picked it up, flipping instinctively to the last page I'd written, but it was open to a new entry, one I hadn't written. My handwriting, but not my hand. He's still here. I dropped it. That's when the world began to bend. The corners of the room curved like heat over asphalt. The wallpaper seemed to ripple, like something was pressing against it from the other side, struggling to get through. My balance faltered, not from fear, but from a sudden shift, like gravity had turned sideways. Whispers rushed in, not one voice, many, overlapping. Children, women, a low rasp too deep to place. I backed toward the hallway, gripping the doorframe, but just before I could leave, I saw the mirror, an old, full-length one nailed to the back of the door. My reflection stared back, but didn't match my movements. Blinked. Once, I hadn't, and its mouth moved. Just 3 words, mouthed slowly. Don't look up. My knees buckled. I stumbled out into the hallway, slamming the door behind me. From somewhere above, I heard it, a soft, scraping, then a dragging noise. Something was in the attic, waiting. It took everything I had to reach for the attic door. My hands were shaking, slick with sweat despite the icy air that poured down from above. I stared up at the narrow opening at the top of the hallway ceiling. The ladder, the same one that had rattled earlier on its own, now hung half unfolded, as if waiting for me. I didn't want to go up there, but I had to. I climbed slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The attic was the last part of the house, the highest point. Local legend whispered that the killer had waited here, hidden in the shadows for hours, before descending upon the family like a nightmare made flesh. If there was any truth left to uncover, it was above me. The attic opened like a mouth. It was darker than the rest of the house, as if the light itself refused to stay. My flashlight barely reached the corners. Cobwebs clung to the beams like veins, and the air was wrong, heavy, as though each breath I took belonged to someone else first. Then came the sound. Thump, drag, thump, drag, not footsteps, not quite. Something near footsteps, as if someone was crawling just out of view, dragging something heavy behind them. I froze. The sound stopped. My light flicked to the left, landing on the far wall. And that's when I saw them. Scratches. 8 tally marks, carved deep into the wood. Fresh, jagged, one for each victim. And beneath them, something else. A small drawing, pinned by a rusted nail to the ceiling beam. It hadn't been there before. A child's drawing. Paper, yellowed with age. Crayon scrawled in frantic color. A figure, smiling with hollow eyes, holding a red-streaked axe. 8 stick figures lay in a line beside it. Then I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Wet. Close. I spun around. No one. But the sound didn't stop. It circled me, rising and falling, as if something was moving around the beams just above my head. Something watching. The floor shifted under my feet. Crack. A support beam behind me collapsed without warning, crashing down in a cloud of dust and splinters. I barely dodged it. My flashlight clattered across the floor and spun wildly, its beam catching a sudden shape in the far corner. A face, pale, childlike, but twisted, wrong. A grin stretched far too wide, and 2 eyes gleamed like wet stone. It stared without blinking. The smile never changed. Then it crawled backward into the wall, vanishing between 2 beams as if it had melted through the boards. The attic door slammed shut above me. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I scrambled to the ladder, half falling, half jumping, hitting the hallway floor hard enough to bruise. Behind me, the attic shuddered, boards groaning like something enormous had shifted inside. The house howled, not with wind, not with structure, with voices. Children, dozens of them, wailing, screaming, laughing. I flew down the stairs, past the guest room, past the broken doll, past the chair still overturned where I'd first entered. The hallway mirror caught my eye as I passed, and again my reflection didn't follow. It stayed behind, watching me go, and it smiled. I slammed through the front door, stumbled down the porch steps, and collapsed onto the dead grass outside. The night air hit me like a wave. The house loomed silently behind me, the gables sharp as teeth in the moonlight. I didn't look back again. Later that night, in my motel room, I opened my journal to write what I could remember. The entry was already there, my handwriting, pages filled with words I didn't put down. One sentence at the bottom, underlined twice. You brought something out with you. Now, even far from Villisca, the lights flicker without cause. My phone rings with no one on the line, and sometimes, late at night, I hear a soft, dragging sound outside my room, like something still searching, still waiting for me to come back, or worse, for someone else to open that attic door. Story 4. Specter of Whitechapel, London, England. The fog was thicker than soup that night, so thick it swallowed the lamps whole, leaving only sickly halos in the dark. My lantern barely cut through more than a few feet ahead, flickering with every nervous step I took. It was late, far too late, and I shouldn't have gone out at all, not with the killing still fresh in every whisper down Whitechapel Road. They called him Jack the Ripper. I'd read the papers, heard the grim accounts pass between mouths pressed close in fear. 5 women so far, their names etched in dread. Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes, and Kelly. I hadn't known any of them well, but I'd seen them. Once I passed Annie Chapman by Hanbury Street, her eyes soft, her smile fleeting. She was gone now. They all were, and yet, as I walked past the boarded windows and sleeping alleys, I heard her. A scream, sharp and ragged, tore through the air from just beyond the butcher's shop. Mrs. Chapman? It was her voice, I was certain. But how could that be? She'd been dead nearly a week, cut open and left in the dirt like something gutted and discarded. I froze. My breath fogged the air in front of me, my hand trembling around the lantern's handle. The cats scattered, their yowls slicing the silence like broken glass. I turned toward the sound, my feet moving before reason could catch them. The alley was just ahead, to the left. A narrow slit between buildings where the gaslight barely dared to reach. Something moved there, slow, deliberate, a hunched figure. I stepped closer, and the glow of my lantern caught the edge of red. Not just red, blood. A shawl soaked in it. A woman lay still beneath the figure's long shadow, her throat a gaping wound, so deep it seemed her head barely clung to her neck. It was Catherine Eddowes. I recognized her from the sketches, her face, her hair, the boots still on her feet. But she had already died, hadn't she? Found near Mitre Square, they'd said. This wasn't supposed to be real. It couldn't be. Then he looked up. A man, if he could be called that, rose from the body with a calm too cold for any sane world. Gaunt, too tall. His coat hung in greasy folds like rotted fabric. His face was hidden, save for his mouth, which curled into something far too wide and wrong to be human. A grin, a razor's grin. I dropped the lantern. Sparks scattered across the cobbles. I turned and ran. Through the fog, through the dark, through my own panicked breaths, echoing back at me like laughter. Behind me, footsteps. Not hurried, not stumbling, measured. He didn't need to rush. He knew he'd catch me. I slipped, my knee smashing into cold stone. The footsteps stopped. Then hands, like iron, gripped my shoulders. I screamed or tried to. A sharp pressure closed around my throat. I remember the chill of something thin and cold against my skin. Then a thrust. And then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, the sky was pale, the fog thin and rising. I lay in the same alley. The lantern was shattered beside me. My coat was torn, my throat ached, but it wasn't cut. Blood stained my hands, but none of it seemed to be mine. He was gone, and so was the body. I woke to the chill of morning mist curling against my face. At first, I thought I was in my own bed. Maybe I'd fallen ill and dreamt it all. But no, the ground beneath me was cobbled and damp, the air thick with rot and soot. I was still in that alley. I sat up slowly. My coat was torn, the hem damp with something darker than rain. My lantern lay shattered beside me, its glass glinting like teeth. But Catherine, she was gone. The shawl, the blood, the figure hunched over her, all of it vanished. There was no body, no trail, no sign of the man who had looked into me with those dead, gleaming eyes. I staggered home, each step feeling borrowed, like I was walking through someone else's dream. When I passed the baker's cart on Wentworth Street, I asked if he'd heard anything, screams, footsteps, anything. But he just shook his head and said, "I look pale, should rest more, rest." How does one rest after nearly dying? Inside my flat, everything felt wrong. My teacup was still on the table, half full. The chair was still turned from where I'd left it. But something had changed. The air had weight. My skin itched as if watched. That night, the fog returned. I didn't dare light a lamp, just sat by the window, curtains barely parted. Around midnight, I saw him. He stood across the street under the broken sign of the tailor's shop, not moving, just watching, a tall shape in a greasy coat, face in shadow. I blinked, and he was gone. The next night, I saw him again, this time on the rooftop opposite, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. No sound, no movement, but the same grin. Somehow I knew it was there even if I couldn't see it. I've stopped asking the neighbors. They look at me with careful smiles now. One even suggested I see a doctor. But I know what I saw. I felt his hands. I heard Catherine's breath gurgle as she died. And when I close my eyes, I hear them whisper. Not words, but fragments. Scratches in the walls. Footsteps down hallways I've never walked. There's a coldness that comes just before I fall asleep, like someone is breathing against my neck. Some nights, I find myself standing at the door, key in hand, with no memory of how I got there, drawn outside by something I don't understand. I'm starting to wonder, did I survive? Or did he take something from me that night in the fog? I don't know when they first appeared, only that they never truly left. It began with reflections. At first, I thought the mist outside was playing tricks. I'd glance at the hallway mirror and see a shape behind me, a shawl, a torn bonnet, a pale eye glinting. But when I turned, there was only silence and the distant creak of carriages. Then came the voices. Not quite words, just the hush of breath that didn't belong to me. They came clearer as nights passed. The first I saw, truly saw, was Mary Ann Nichols. She stood in my parlor as though she'd never left the dark of Buck's Row. Her neck lolled unnaturally, a gaping wound where her voice had once lived. Her eyes, clouded still, met mine, and though her lips moved, no sound emerged. The others followed, one by one, Annie Chapman clutching her stomach as if trying to hold herself together. Elizabeth Stride, who wept without tears. Catherine Eddowes, her gaze the sharpest, her presence the coldest. She stood near the fireplace, unmoving, her mutilations lit faintly by the hearth's dying embers. And then Mary Jane Kelly, whose face was wrong. It was as though someone had tried to rebuild it and failed. They did not threaten me. They did not speak. But they watched, always watching, as though expecting me to do something. It was only when I started sketching that the fog inside my mind lifted. One night, unable to sleep, I took charcoal to paper. The strokes came quickly, almost without thought. When I looked down, the face of Chapman stared back at me, eyes hollow, jaw slack. I sketched for hours, each drawing bleeding into the next, and when the last face was finished, I noticed the margins of the pages were filled with strange marks, symbols, lines that looped and crossed in ways I didn't remember drawing. Then I saw them, those same marks, etched faintly on the walls of my flat, not painted, scratched, as if fingernails had dragged across the plaster while I slept. I stood in the doorway to the kitchen one morning and saw Nichols there again. She lifted a trembling arm and pointed toward the ceiling. When I followed her gaze, I saw it. Another mark, almost glowing in the morning light, hidden in a seam of cracked paint. They weren't haunting me. They were trying to guide me. I wasn't just a witness. I was meant to see, to remember, and perhaps to finish something they couldn't. Something in me has shifted. I no longer ask why. I simply go. Night after night, the fog returns to guide me. Each evening I feel it rise from the cobblestones like breath from a dying thing. Thick, damp, familiar. It clings to me now, finds me, even when I try to stay inside. A hollow pulse hums beneath Whitechapel's skin, and I walk the veins of it, drawn to places I never meant to go. Last week, I woke with ash on my fingertips and dirt beneath my nails. My boots were wet, my hem torn. I had no memory of leaving home, but I had left. I'd gone to Buck's Row, where Mary Ann Nichols was found, and I spoke her name aloud. Since then, I've gone to them all. Hanbury Street, Dutfield's Yard, Mitre Square, Miller's Court. Each place grips me like a hook under the ribs. I do not need directions. The fog brings me. I hear it before I arrive, faint sobbing, the creak of invisible footsteps, that awful drag of something metal against stone. Sometimes I see through their eyes. I feel their dread. Nichols' final glance over her shoulder, strides last confused step into darkness. Edhouse's horror, staring up at a face she must have thought human. Kelly's scream as the door shut behind her. I see it all, and when I look down, my hands are often trembling, covered in charcoal smudges, though I haven't drawn a thing. It's not just the women anymore. Last night, I stood near Mitre Square, still and silent. The gaslight flickered in a broken arc. A shape moved behind me, too quiet for a man, too slow for a shadow. When I turned, there was no one, but I heard the scrape again, low and deliberate, the blade, and then his silhouette across the street, still as bone, the man from the alley, gaunt, watching. He never moves, never chases, he only waits. My neighbor, Mrs. Allen, said she saw me barefoot again, murmuring to someone who wasn't there, staring at brick walls and mouthing things in silence. She says I cried. I don't remember crying, but the walls remember. They carry the marks I've left behind, those strange carvings I never recall making. They're on my floorboards now, on my windowsill, scratched on the inside of my wardrobe door. Tonight is different. It's the anniversary, Mary Jane Kelly's death, the last of the 5. I feel it like a storm rolling beneath my skin. The fog arrived early this evening, pressing against the glass like it wants inside. The air tastes like iron. I think it's time. The sketches have led me here. So many pages, so many faces, all of them waiting. I've packed them away. I don't know why, only that they must be brought to Miller's Court. My hands know what to do. I don't even feel cold anymore. They need to be laid out, returned. There are things buried in these streets, things that don't sleep, and I am the only one left who remembers. Postscript from a constable's report dated November 9th, 1889. At first light, a young woman, Miss Mary Griffin, was found collapsed in the ruins of Miller's Court. She was barefoot, clutching a bundle of torn paper. No injuries, no blood. Her sketches, once studied, aligned precisely with the original crime scenes. Details never released publicly. Some of the images included angles and perspectives impossible without first-hand presence. When questioned, Miss Griffin would only whisper, "They showed me. They made me see, and now I think they're finally at rest." But I am not. Story 5. The Plague Isle of Poveglia. I've lived in Venice my whole life, and I've spent most of it pretending Poveglia was just a crumbling speck in the lagoon, a footnote in a tour guide. But when the municipal office called, asking me to investigate recent signs of trespassing on the island, I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. I told myself it was just another job. Check the ruins, report back. Easy money. Still, when I arrived at the dock that morning, the fog sat thick and low over the water like a lid on a boiling pot. I hesitated, hand on the rope tethering the boat. It was a small thing, barely enough for 2 people, but I'd gone out in worse. An old fisherman sat mending nets nearby. When he saw where I was headed, his hand stopped moving. "Poveglia?" he asked, squinting one rheumy eye. I nodded. He shook his head slowly. "No one returns unchanged from that place." I forced a laugh, but it didn't reach my chest. "Sure," I said, and pushed off into the lagoon. The engine buzzed like a gnat in my ears as I steered the boat forward. Water slapped against the hull, echoing into nothing. The fog swallowed sound. No gulls cried, no wind stirred. The stillness was unnatural, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I turned off the engine as I neared the island, what was left of it. The outline of trees rose like bony fingers out of the mist, framing the broken stonework of the old hospital. Ivy clung to the ruins like a drowning man's grip. That's when I saw it, just for a second. Something small and pale flitting between the trees at the edge of the shore, too fast for detail, white, child-sized. Gone. My hand trembled as I tied the boat to the rotting dock. The boards groaned beneath my weight. Reeds whispered with every step I took, soft, dry sounds, like voices murmuring secrets in a language I didn't know. I told myself I wouldn't bring anything superstitious with me. But now, standing on that cursed shore, I felt a chill seep into my bones, even though the summer sun was already climbing. I paused at the tree line. The island loomed silent ahead, choked with overgrowth, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and something older. I looked back once. The boat bobbed gently in the water, half swallowed by mist. With a breath I didn't feel reach my lungs, I stepped into the island's interior. The reeds behind me fell silent. Something was waiting, and I had just walked into its home. I didn't want to go inside. No one in their right mind would have. But the reports from the city were clear, lights seen in the windows at night, voices drifting across the water. Someone or something had been here, and it was my job to confirm if the place was still deserted. The entrance to the hospital yawned open, half swallowed by ivy. Bricks lay scattered like broken teeth across the threshold. As I stepped through, the air changed, thicker, heavier, pressed against my chest like a weight. The smell was immediate, damp, Moldavian. Underneath that, something metallic and sharp, like old blood. The hallway stretched ahead, half collapsed and swallowed by vines. My boots squelched on the floor, the tiles buried under layers of rot. I passed empty doorways, dark rooms with rusted gurneys and shattered glass. A shattered window let in pale light that cast fractured patterns on the floor. I found the ledger in what must have once been the administrative office. It lay on a desk, warped by time, but strangely intact. I brushed off a film of dust and cracked it open. Names, hundreds of them. Some were neatly written, others scratched in a frenzy. Many were crossed out, viciously, deeply, like someone had been trying to erase them from existence. One entry made my breath hitch. Patient 412, screaming child, sealed in isolation, no recovery. My fingers froze on the page. I didn't know why, but that line hit something in me. I could almost hear it, the echo of that scream trapped in the walls. Then came the sound. A door slammed shut somewhere behind me. I spun around. No wind, no breeze, nothing should have moved. And yet the hospital, dead and still for centuries, had just stirred. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded wrong, thin and lost in the hall. No answer, but footsteps echoed down the corridor, software bare, moving just out of sync with my own. I followed them. I had to. The corridor narrowed. Walls arched inward as if the building itself was recoiling. I passed a room where rusted surgical tools were still laid out on a metal tray. Some were fused to the surface by rust. One tray held something fresh, dark streaks I didn't dare touch. The smell was worse now, antiseptic, laced with decay. My flashlight dimmed and flickered. I tapped it. Nothing. I kept walking in the half-light. Then I heard it. A cry. Thin, distant. A child's voice. "Mama." It barely reached my ears, as if carried by memory rather than air. I froze. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs refused to obey. I stood in that hallway, heart racing, as the voice faded into silence. Then came the coughs, wet, raspy, one after another, echoing from every direction at once. I turned and walked fast, trying to retrace my steps. The walls felt closer now, the corridors darker. Every open doorway felt like a mouth waiting to bite. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what might be following. When I finally burst through the back of the hospital, the sunlight nearly blinded me. I leaned against a dead tree, gasping, drenched in sweat. I'd gone in expecting to find ruins, but what I found was a place still breathing in the dark, still listening. And whatever it was, it knew I was there. The farther I walked from the crumbling hospital, the quieter the island became. Even the wind seemed afraid to follow. Beyond the rear courtyard, a crooked iron gate, more rust than metal, marked the boundary to what the old maps labeled simply as Campo Sud. But the locals had a different name for it, the Ash Fields. The moment I stepped beyond that gate, I knew why. The soil beneath my boots squelched and gave slightly, like stepping onto soaked peat. But the earth wasn't wet from rain. It was soft, granular. My boot crunched something brittle. I froze, looked down. It wasn't a branch. It was a rib. I tried to step carefully, but with every movement I disturbed the dead. Some bones jutted out of the soil like pale fingers reaching skyward. Others lay scattered, broken, peeking through mats of overgrown grass. The air here was wrong, stale and chemical, like rot mixed with something bitter, something burnt. It clung to the back of my throat. I followed a narrow path lined with reed clusters and toppled markers. The names on them had faded into nothing long ago, but their presence lingered, silent accusations from the earth. Then I saw it, a depression in the ground, sunken and ragged like the land itself had caved in from grief. I moved closer, drawn by some horrible magnetism. A coffin lay exposed in the pit. Splintered, half rotten, its lid torn away. Inside was a skeletal form, curled as if still writhing. The jaw hung slack, and wedged tightly between the teeth was a jagged black stone. Obsidian, maybe. Smooth, glassy, and wrong. Why would anyone put that there? The skull was tilted, and I swear, its empty sockets faced me, locked on my face. I stepped back. Another crunch, another bone, and then the ground gave way. I tumbled into a shallow trench, hands scraping raw against shards of rib and spine. The stench down there was worse, ancient, pungent, like something that had waited too long to be forgotten. Blood ran from a cut on my palm. It fell in thick drops, soaking into the soil. And that's when the air changed. The reeds began to sway, not in the breeze, there was no breeze, but as if something were brushing past them. Moving through them, watching, a sound rode the wind, not the cry of a bird, not the rustle of leaves, a whisper, faint at first, then many all at once, whispers, overlapping, layered, hundreds of voices murmuring beneath the earth just below my feet. I scrambled out of the pit, heart hammering so hard I couldn't hear. My flashlight bobbed wildly. Shadows twisted in the trees. That's when I saw it. A small shape, pale, child-sized, darting just beyond the reeds. No face, no features, just a fleeting outline that moved too fast, too smooth. I didn't call out. I didn't want it to turn around. I ran, through thorned vines and fields of ash, past more sunken graves and crumbled stones. The murmurs followed, rising to a chorus of pained coughs and sharp gasps, sounds etched into the very marrow of this place. By the time I reached the clearing, I couldn't breathe. My hand shook, my cut throbbed, and behind me, deep in the reeds, something still moved. It wasn't done with me. I didn't know where else to go. The ash clung to my boots like wet cement, my breath shallow, torn between panic and exhaustion. But I needed a vantage point, a signal, anything to prove I wasn't alone in this nightmare. That's when I saw the tower. Its silhouette rose above the tree line like a rotting tooth, cracked and leaning slightly as if time itself had tried to swallow it. The bell was long gone, or so I thought, rusted silent for decades. Still, something about it pulled at me. Maybe height would bring perspective. Maybe it would give me a way out. The steps were slick with decay. Moss and mildew coated the walls in patches. I gripped the broken railing and began to climb, ignoring the wet squelch of each footfall. Halfway up, I stopped. Handprints, small ones, smeared across the wall like a child had pressed against it while falling. They weren't old. The grime was fresh, disturbed as if someone or something had passed through minutes before me. I kept climbing. At the top, the belfry yawned open to the sky, ringed by broken stonework and twisted metal. The bell mechanism sat rusted in place, gears jammed with ivy. There was no way it could ring, yet somehow it did. One toll. It boomed through the island, too loud for its broken state, too clear for the windless air. My heart froze. I dropped to a crouch, ears ringing, eyes scanning the ground below. The reeds swayed, but there was no wind. A ripple moved through them, slow, deliberate, as if something was pushing them aside from beneath. Not walking, crawling. Then I saw it. Several pale figures, small, motionless. Children? They stood in the clearing where I had just run from, facing the tower, facing me. Their features were indistinct in the fading light, like their faces had been blurred by water or time. But I could feel their gaze, like hooks sinking into my chest. I backed away. The tower groaned beneath me. Another toll. 2. The bell vibrated, but it wasn't swinging. It wasn't moving at all. The sound just came as if summoned by some force deep below the island. I turned to flee. The staircase stretched down into darkness, walls damp and pulsing with the same mildew stench that haunted the hospital. But something was different now. It was warmer, closer, breathing. The narrow passage echoed with it, ragged, shallow breaths not my own. I ran, slipping, skidding, gripping the rail so hard I left blood behind from the earlier cut on my hand. All the while, the bell tolled once more. 3. The sound shook the walls this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. A groan rose from beneath the island itself, low and full of sorrow, as if the earth were mourning its own memory. At the base of the tower, I burst into the woods. Whispers swarmed around me now, constant, urgent, coughs, gasps, pleas, the voices of plague victims echoing through the centuries. My flashlight died, but the path ahead shimmered faintly with moonlight. I reached the dock. The boat was gone. No, it was drifting. The rope had been untied. I screamed, useless, already running. I flung myself into the water, arms numb with fear. The lagoon was ice. The blackness swallowed me whole. I kicked, fought, reached. My hand found the edge of the boat. I hauled myself in, shivering, choking, retching up bitter salt. When I looked back at the island, I saw them, shapes at the shoreline, still watching. No breeze stirred their clothes, no breath moved their chests. Just pale shadows standing in silent vigil as if they had been waiting for something or someone. The cries began again, high, warbling, children wailing, not in pain, in grief. I broke. The sobs came out of me without resistance. I collapsed onto the damp wooden boards of the boat, the sound of their voices threading through the fog as I drifted away. Poveglia faded behind me, a silhouette in the mist. The tower stood dark again. No more bells, no more cries. But I knew they were still there, waiting. I won't go back, not ever. And I'll never again laugh at the fishermen who say their nets pull up bones, or the midwives who swear they hear bells on windless nights. They're right. That island remembers everything. And some things don't want to be forgotten. Story 6. The Whispering Labyrinth of Paris. I've always believed history hides its darkest truths just beneath the surface. For Paris, those truths lie underfoot, far beneath the elegance of wrought iron balconies and lamp-lit streets, in silence, behind stacked skulls and forgotten names. My name is Julian Moreau. I'm a historian by trade and by compulsion, a collector of urban myths. Among all the legends I've pursued, none gripped me more than the accounts of those who disappeared into the catacombs, not pickpockets or fugitives, but explorers, archivists, students like myself. People who knew what they were doing until the tunnels swallowed them whole. That night, the storm had rolled in like a warning, sky bruised purple, air heavy. I told myself it was the perfect time. Rue de Grenelle was nearly deserted when I slipped through the wrought iron grate, one hidden behind a crumbling wall overgrown with ivy. It led into a shaft few used anymore, too narrow, too unstable, officially sealed off. But I'd done my research. I had my maps, my lantern, my resolve. The ladder groaned under my weight as I descended, each rung slick with moisture. When I reached the bottom, the quiet was absolute. No traffic, no thunder, just the slow drip of unseen water somewhere ahead. The first corridor was lined with bones arranged in geometric precision. femurs stacked like bricks, skulls interspersed at eye level, watching, decorative, intentional, the architecture of death. I reminded myself it was all symbolic. This was once a solution to the city's overflowing cemeteries, not some macabre art installation. Still, the longer I stared at the arrangement, the less random it felt. Patterns emerged, repetitions that felt too deliberate. I marked my route as I moved, charcoal on the walls, subtle, just in case. My lantern cast a golden beam ahead and behind, throwing my shadow long and stretched against the bone-lined walls. Then the light flickered once, twice. I tapped the casing, nothing. When it stabilized again, I realized the corridor had narrowed slightly. I turned back to check my marks, only to find the wall behind me had changed. Where there should have been open path, there was now a solid barricade, femurs stacked high, tight, and clean. I hadn't heard a sound. Panic coiled in my chest. I ran my fingers along the wall, bones cold and slick, unmoving. I hadn't imagined it. The route I came from was gone. I whispered aloud, trying to calm myself. You took a wrong turn, that's all. But my voice sounded too loud, as if it didn't belong here. The silence broke with a soft breath. Not mine, not the wind. A whisper. Human, but distant. A wordless murmur, as though someone were speaking behind the wall or through them. I froze. My skin crawled. I turned in a slow circle, lantern raised. Shadows danced and froze with every movement. The whispers grew faint again, or deeper in. My only choice was forward. The bones shifted under my boots, grinding like old teeth. I took careful steps, noting every turn, left, straight, right. My charcoal marks had stopped appearing. The stone was too wet now. I was moving blind. Then from somewhere ahead came the sound that stopped me cold. A giggle, high, delicate, childlike, impossible. I held my breath. It came again, echoing down the corridor, distorted by stone and time. A low, wheezing sigh followed, like something deflating in the dark. It was coming closer. I turned a corner sharply, the lamp nearly slipping from my hand, and stumbled into a small chamber. The walls curved in, tight. In the center was a single shelf at eye level. Upon it, a skull. It wasn't like the others. This one was cleaner, polished, its sockets deeper, its grin wider. It stared directly at me, and something in me, something old, instinctive, whispered, "It sees you." I stepped back. The whispering rose again behind me. Not a single voice, but many, soft, overlapping, urgent, as though the walls themselves had something to say. I spun around. The tunnel forked unexpectedly, a junction not on any of my maps. 3 paths, no markers, no idea which direction I'd come from. Bones on every wall, every one of them grinning. I don't know how long I stood there, my breath fogging the glass of the lantern. The whispers subsided, fading into the endless hush. But their echo lingered in my mind like something unfinished. I picked the middle tunnel, not because it seemed safer, but because the other two felt watched. Each step took me deeper into the unknown. The air was colder now, heavier, and I could feel it, something just beyond the range of my light, watching, waiting, and beneath my own heartbeat, I heard it again. The faint scrape of footsteps, not mine. Someone else was here, or something. I don't know how long I stood in that unmarked intersection, the air cold against my face, the silence swelling like pressure behind my ears. My maps were useless now, either wrong, outdated, or made irrelevant by the catacombs' ever-shifting design. The bones were everywhere, and they were watching. Still, Something kept me moving. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was that damn whisper, the one that didn't come from my own mind, yet somehow echoed within it. I took the middle tunnel. The further I went, the colder it became. Not a natural cold, but a presence. Something that clung to the skin, sinking into bone. My breath steamed in the lantern's glow, and each exhale felt thinner than the last. The air no longer smelled of wet stone. It smelled old, dry, like pages sealed in tombs. Dry. And yet I could hear water dripping somewhere just out of reach. Then the whispers returned. Not a single voice this time, but many. Dozens. They folded over each other in hushed fragments, overlapping until they sounded like wind through leaves. But these were not leaves. These were words. I stopped walking. They weren't speaking to me, not exactly. But as I stood there, lantern trembling in my grip, the voices began to align, like tuning forks finding the same pitch. They began to form thoughts I hadn't spoken, but recognized, my own thoughts. You're not alone. You shouldn't have come. It sees you. I turned sharply. The tunnel behind me was still, too still. I kept moving, pressing forward through a low arch, barely wide enough for my shoulders. The walls were narrowing. Then, around the bend, the tunnel widened again. And that's when I saw them. The instruments. A long corridor stretched ahead, illuminated by faint, natural light filtering through a cracked stone ceiling above. Bones lined the walls as usual, but now they were shaped. A rib cage bent and wired like a harp. A row of femurs lashed together to resemble a flute. Vertebrae twisted into strings, anchored on jawbones like violins. Not placed by accident, not crumbling naturally. This was crafted, and not centuries ago. Some of the marrow was still red. My stomach turned. Suddenly, a low hum began to rise. Not from any one direction. It was everywhere. A droning harmonic vibration that set my teeth on edge. Bones began to rattle along the corridor, gently at first, then more violently, like something was stirring beneath them. One of the skulls clattered free from the wall and dropped to the floor in front of me. It split open, empty, just bone. But I could feel it watching. The hum grew louder, then silence. A snap of soundlessness that made my ears ring. I backed away from the skull and nearly stepped on another. And in that silence, I became aware of something else. Breathing, not mine. I raised the lantern, swinging the light in all directions. Nothing, until, at the edge of vision, movement. Just a sliver. Something ducking out of the beam, retreating into shadow. The hum returned, but softer now, like a lullaby, played on unseen strings. I didn't run. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I crept forward, one foot, then another. At the far end of the tunnel, a wall of skulls formed a dead end, no path forward. But in the center of that wall, set slightly deeper into the stone, was a single skull different from the rest. It had eyes, not real ones. Glass or marble, I couldn't tell. But in the lantern light, they caught a gleam. And as I stepped closer, the hum fell away, replaced by the whisper again. This time clear, singular. Keep going. I blinked. The skull's mouth had moved. It couldn't have. I stepped back. Behind me, something scraped against the bone-covered floor. I turned, breath catching in my throat. A long corridor now extended where a wall had been seconds before, bones lining the sides, their patterns unfamiliar and wrong, as if whoever arranged them had no sense of symmetry, only intent. I should have run, but instead I stepped into the new passage. Behind me, the music resumed. The bone choir was awake. No sound should echo in a place so tightly wound in bone. And yet, every time I took a step, it was like the walls whispered it back to me, not once, but 3, 4, 5 times, until I couldn't tell if I was hearing my footsteps or someone else's matching them from behind. By now, my lantern was dying. Its flame had thinned into a shivering wick of orange, and the cold was sinking into my fingertips. The bone choir tunnel was long behind me, though I wasn't convinced I'd left it entirely. Something from that place had followed. I could feel it in my lungs, like I'd breathed in the harmony of the dead, and it was still humming behind my teeth. I turned another corner and found myself in a chamber, circular, low-ceilinged. The lantern's dying light revealed skulls embedded in the walls, each one angled toward the center of the room. It was like walking into a silent amphitheater where the audience had long since decayed, but still watched the stage. Only I was the performance. I edged into the middle of the room and slowly turned in a circle. Dozens of skulls, no two in the same pose, but all of them focused. The longer I stood there, the more certain I became that their positions had shifted, slightly, subtly, the way a dream becomes nightmare by inches. Then the silence broke. A giggle, high-pitched, fragile, like the laughter of a child echoing off water. I swung my lantern around. Nothing. And then I saw it. On a ledge carved into the stone wall, a single skull sitting perfectly upright, as if placed there recently. Its eye sockets were filled with marble, not glass, marble, veined and gray and wrong. It faced me. I looked away for only a second. When I looked back, it had tilted, just enough to notice. I staggered back, heart hammering. The skull hadn't fallen. It hadn't moved naturally. It had turned, watching me. I didn't wait. I ran. The corridor ahead narrowed again, the ceiling pressing down as if the catacombs themselves were growing heavier. I could feel my shoulders brushing bone with each step. The light ahead was non-existent. Only my lantern, now dim and sputtering. Behind me, bones rattled. Just a few at first, then dozens, then all at once. I stumbled, skidded on something slick. The floor dipped, and suddenly I was tumbling forward, arms flailing, the lantern slipping from my fingers and crashing to the ground. Darkness. Complete. My palms hit wet stone. Cold, slippery, and then the sound, a sob. Low, wet, childlike, just ahead. I froze, tried not to breathe. It came again, closer now. The kind of cry that isn't looking for help, just mourning, agonized, endless. The lantern flared weakly on its side, enough to show the ground before me, a pool of water, stagnant, reflecting nothing. Ripples began to form at the center, but nothing had fallen in. Something was moving beneath it. My knees screamed as I scrambled back. The sobbing grew louder, and then stopped, replaced by a gurgling exhale, as if something had surfaced but never truly learned to breathe. I didn't look into the pool. I didn't want to see what had caused the ripples. I turned to run, but the tunnel behind me had changed. It stretched longer, wider, the walls now closer, the ceiling lower, and all around me a new sound, scraping, fingernails, bone, something dragging itself along the walls. The giggle returned, but this time it was no longer childlike. It was mocking. I pressed forward, bones cracking underfoot, the last of my lantern's light flickering like a dying star. And in the distance, barely perceptible but unmistakable, I saw it. The faint outline of a coffin, half submerged. Its lid trembled. I should have turned back long ago. The city above felt like a memory now, faint and unreachable. Down here, in this stone-wrapped grave, time didn't flow. It stalled, stopped, waited, and so did they. The coffin sat in the center of the black pool, lid trembling with each breath of unseen air. The water around it rippled outward endlessly, as if disturbed by a hand too light to see. My lamp, still dim but alive, cast its last desperate glow across the surface. I should have run. I knew I should have. But something in me, some part that wasn't logic or fear or instinct, stepped forward. The sobbing behind me had stopped completely. That silence was worse. I waded into the ankle-deep water, cold as death. Bones floated just beneath the surface, finger bones, teeth. When I reached the coffin, the lid shifted again. I gripped its edge, fingers trembling. The air around me buzzed with the weight of everything I'd seen. The whispering skulls, the giggling echoes, the music of bone. I'd come for answers, so I opened it. A rush of dust exploded outward, thick as smoke. I gasped, blinded, coughing, falling back into the water. The lantern clattered away, and for a moment I saw nothing. Then a creak, not from the coffin, from behind me. Something was in the tunnel. I turned. The corridor had changed again. It stretched deeper, now impossibly long. The walls, once tightly packed with skulls, now gaped with holes. Eye sockets empty, waiting. The air pulsed with movement. Then I felt it, a weight, a presence brushing my shoulder like a breath turned solid. Cold fingers trailing across my back, not grabbing, just noticing me. I stumbled to my feet, water sloshing, feet slipping on submerged bone. That was when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine, fast, light, darting across the bone-covered floor behind me. I ran. The tunnel seemed to shift with every step, angling upward one moment, then spiraling the next. I passed the familiar, the skull shelf, the bone choir's warped corridor, the chamber of watching skulls, all twisted, wrong, as if something had remembered them but only vaguely, and rebuilt them just for me. My breath was ragged, my side ached, but the sound behind me never stopped. Light, erratic, too fast to be human. I don't remember how long I ran, only that eventually, light, a faint, natural glow from a crumbling stairwell carved into the stone. I screamed, not out of terror, out of hope. The exit. I didn't think. I just bolted for it. Just as I reached the bottom step, a hand shot from the wall, bone yellowed and cracked, fingers splayed wide, and grabbed my ankle. It was strong, cold, real. I went down hard, lantern smashing beside me, plunging everything into shadow, kicking, scrambling. My foot tore free, skin scraped raw. I lunged up the steps 2 at a time, the sound of brittle fingers dragging across stone behind me, and then air, rain, Paris. I collapsed onto the slick sidewalk, coughing, drenched, shivering. The storm still raged overhead, indifferent. Traffic hummed in the distance, just beyond the alley. I touched my side, half expecting to find torn flesh, deep gouges, blood. But there was only sweat and bone dust. So much bone dust. I lay there for a long time, watching the streetlights blink, listening to the distant hum of life. The catacombs let me go, but something followed me out. Even now, back in my flat, surrounded by books and maps and normalcy, I still hear the whispers. In the corners of my room, in the hum of the plumbing, in the silence between my own thoughts. Not every voice in the catacombs is trapped in bone. Some of them remember, and now They remember me. Story 7, The Black Bird of Chernobyl, Ukraine. I was just a junior control room engineer, 25, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who listens more than he speaks, especially in a place like Chernobyl. They assigned me to Reactor 4 3 months before the test. It should have been a career maker. Instead, it was the start of something else. At first, it was the lights, not the overhead fluorescents. Those were faulty and flickered on a good day. No, I mean the monitor lights, the control panel indicators. Sometimes they blinked when they shouldn't, in unison, like synchronized breathing. I chalked it up to a fault in the diagnostic relay, logged it, moved on. But then came the whispers. I told no one. What was I supposed to say? That I heard voices behind the reinforced concrete walls? That they spoke in a language no one teaches, made of breath and echo and faint distortion? It wasn't talking, not exactly. It was like listening to the inside of a dying machine, groaning, muttering things it remembered from when it was alive. My sleep began to crack. First, short dreams, wings fluttering behind thick glass. A shape, always the same, too large, too dark, hovering just out of sight. I'd wake up gasping, sweat pouring, the taste of ash in my mouth. I told myself it was stress. I worked longer hours, hid it from the others. But each night, the dreams deepened. 5 days before the test, the dreams ended, and something else took their place. It started with a sound in the ventilation shaft. I was alone in the control room, pulling night duty. The sound was soft at first, like wind dragging feathers across metal. Then it became something more deliberate, pacing like claws tapping steel. I stood, walked to the far console. My heart was beating too fast. I placed my hand on the edge of the panel for balance, and that's when I saw it, just outside the observation window. A silhouette. High above the reactor compound, between the smokestacks, something massive hovered. It had no head, no face, just a heaving torso, jagged and wet-looking, and wings that stretched wider than the cooling towers, blacker than shadow, and red eyes. Not on a head, but embedded in the upper chest, glowing like dying stars. I didn't move, couldn't. It drifted closer to the glass, silent, slow, and for one breathless second, I thought it was looking at me. The glass between us began to fog over, as if something cold had passed right through me. And then, just like that, it was gone. No sound, no wind, just the distant, lonely hum of the reactor. I didn't report the sighting. I couldn't even write it down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. For the rest of that shift, I felt like something had crawled into the wires beneath the floor, watching, waiting. That night, I didn't sleep, not because of the dreams. They never came back. What came instead was the feeling of being followed, in my apartment, in the halls, even in the shower. Lights would flicker as I passed. Doors creaked open behind me. My reflection lagged in the mirror half a second too slow. 5 days before the test, and the bird had already found me, April 25th, 1986. The day we had prepared for the systems test. It was supposed to be a formality, data to be logged, procedures followed, sleep lost over nothing more than an exercise. But that morning, when I stepped into the control room, something felt off. The silence. It wasn't the usual quiet hum of machinery and low voices. It was deeper, heavier, as though the building itself was holding its breath. I took my seat at the second console, the same one I always used. I remember looking at the back of my own hands resting on the controls and not recognizing them. Numb, pale, shaking slightly, though the room was warm. Hours passed. The test had not yet begun, but everything already felt in motion. Then the lights flickered again. I don't mean a power surge. I mean the glass panels above us dimmed for just a moment, not with electricity, but with shadow. A pulsing, deliberate dark, as if something immense had passed between the building and the sky. I stood and turned toward the windows. It was there, above the cooling pond, hovering. I couldn't speak. I couldn't blink. Its body was vast, nearly blotting out the moonlight. No head, no clear face, just a torso of shifting, sinewed blackness, like flesh unformed, and wings that looked like they'd been torn from some ancient thing long dead. Veins pulsed visibly through them, backlit by red veins like cracked embers. And the eyes, two red orbs embedded in its upper chest, glowing, burning, as they met mine. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The glass between us grew cold, beating with condensation despite the heat of the equipment. I think I whispered something. I don't know what. Maybe a name, maybe nothing at all. Its wings beat once. Not hard. Just enough to make the window rattle in its frame and every screen in the control room flicker with static. It drifted closer, slow and soundless, and then it vanished. Not away, not back into the sky. It was just gone. I stayed there a long time. One of the senior engineers, Mikalenko, called my name twice, then 3 times. I didn't answer until he shook me by the shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked. I turned to him. I opened my mouth, but what came out wasn't words. It was the faintest sound, like wind over bone. He stared at me, confused. He hadn't seen it. None of them had, but I had. The test began just past midnight. I sat at my station, following every step, inputting commands I no longer believed mattered, because I knew, down to the marrow of my spine, that we were already past the point of return. The bird had watched us. It had chosen that night, that place, and now it was waiting. They said it was a power surge, a cascade of human error. That's what the reports read anyway. What they don't document, what they couldn't, is what I saw just before it happened. The test was underway. Midnight bled into morning. Alarms hadn't yet screamed, and the turbine still spun, steady as breath. But there was a moment, one precise, impossible moment, when time broke. The room dimmed, not because of power loss. It dimmed like a memory slipping underwater, and every monitor lit up with static. No numbers, no readouts, just white-gray noise and shapes moving in the distortion, as if something inside the machines was looking back. Then, light. The blast didn't sound like an explosion, not at first. It felt like pressure behind the eyes, a growing weight inside the bones. Then came the sound, deafening, yes, but also deep, wrong, like the ground itself was screaming. And outside the cracked windows, through clouds of smoke and glowing dust, I saw it, perched high on the skeletal crane arm, unmoving. The black bird, its wings now folded, looked like cloaks soaked in tar. Its body steamed in the rising heat. Those red eyes, embedded in that fleshy, featureless torso, glowed brighter than the reactor fire. It didn't flee, it didn't flinch, it watched. Even as men screamed, ran, fell, skin already blistering, lungs burning, it simply gazed down upon us like a monument carved from shadow. I ran, through corridors choked with smoke and confusion. There was blood on the floor, shoes without owners, keys dropped mid-step, and through it all, I kept seeing those glowing coals in my mind, eyes that burned behind my lids, even when I blinked. That night, after evacuation, I slept in a temporary station outside Pripyat, but there was no rest. At 2:14 a.m., the phone beside my cot rang. I answered it. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, the sound of breathing, wet, labored, like something massive with lungs not built for air, and beneath that, faint but distinct, the sound of wings, not flapping freely but brushing against walls, brushing against the phone line. I didn't sleep again. The next night, the phone rang again, and the next. Now, each time I answer, I hear it closer. Sometimes it sounds like the breathing is coming from the other side of the wall. Other times, from just behind me. No one else hears it. I've checked the call logs. They don't exist. But I know it's not done with me. Whatever I saw in that crane didn't vanish with the fire. It followed the blast, the way smoke follows heat. And now it's coming closer. It remembers who watched it. The roads to Pripyat are overgrown now, broken beneath moss and rust. Time has taken the color from the place, leaving behind only the grayness of dust and silence. But silence is a lie here. Even after all these years, something moves within it. I wasn't supposed to return. After the meltdown, they relocated me, buried my records under layers of bureaucracy, told me to adjust. But the calls didn't stop. The blackbird followed me, not in form, but in presence. Each night, it made its way closer, a scrape at the door, a breath on the window, the crackle of a line gone dead just before it spoke. No one believes what they don't understand, and what they don't see, they erase. But I remembered everything. I returned to the zone under a false name, assigned to survey reactor decay. The checkpoints were still there, manned by soldiers who didn't ask questions. They knew better. The forest had grown strange, thicker. Trees bent in ways trees shouldn't bend. And the wind? It didn't whistle. It called, like someone exhaling through rotted teeth. Inside the remains of Reactor 4, the air was still. Too still. Not a bird, not a rat. Just the hushed crackle of Geiger counters and the hum of something old and buried, still trying to breathe. That's when I found the drawings. They were mine, pinned to a scorched locker in the control wing. Drawings I don't remember making dozens of them. Charcoal on paper, smeared and clawed. A headless shape with vast wings and coal red eyes, repeated over and over like a warning. Pages filled with that phrase, over and over in my handwriting, "You should have evacuated." That night, I slept in the old workers' dormitory. I don't know why. I think I needed to know if it was still here. It was. I woke just past 3. The light was gone. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. And I wasn't alone. It didn't speak. It never speaks. But I felt it there, its weight in the room, pressing the walls inward. I couldn't see it. Only those 2 red coals in the corner blinking like a slow heartbeat. And then its wings opened. The gust knocked everything from the shelves. Dust screamed through the cracks in the floor. I tried to move, to run, but my limbs were made of rust. It walked toward me, not flying, but crawling on all 4s, dragging those terrible limbs like they had forgotten what legs were supposed to be. It stopped inches from my face. I could feel the heat of it, the rot of it, and in that instant, it leaned in. No mouth, no voice. But still, I heard it, a whisper, not made of sound, but of understanding. "You saw me. You survived. You remember?" Then it was gone, just like the first time, just like always. But when I rose to leave, I saw them. Footprints in the ash outside the dormitory. Not human, not animal. Something in between. and they didn't lead away. They led into the walls. Now, I live far from the zone, in a sterile compound where everything is clean and humming and bright. But I still see the prints sometimes, just faint, near doors or under my bed. I've stopped answering the phone at night. It rings anyway, and when the line clicks open, I listen. Not because I expect to hear something, but because the silence is worse than the breath, worse than the wings, because the silence means it's already here.